Now, welcome back, and just taking a look at what's still to come. We've got analysis from the State Capture, or of the State Capture Commission, the President's appearance, and we are going to take a look at what happened over the past 2 days. And of course, there's been lots of criticism, but Eusebius McKaiser will help us unpack this. Mixed reaction as well to the President's appearance before the Commission. Some saying that perhaps there wasn't enough probing, others saying that it went well. Ramaphosa has testified in his capacity as the party leader of the African National Congress, and he testified, among other things, that he regrets that the party delayed investigating allegations of state capture through Parliament's committees in 2016, but then denies that this was due to deliberate resistance. He also responded to questions relating to political party funding, including his own CR17 campaign, to which he reiterated that the fund managers did not tell him who gave the campaign money, and they also did not want him to be beholden to those donors. So to help us unpack all of that, what happened over the past 2 days of the ANC president's testimony at the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, we joined now by journalist, political commentator Eusebius McKaiser. Eusebius, good to have you back on Morning Live. Welcome.
It's always a pleasure, Sakina. Good morning to you and the viewers.
So let's just start with your observation over the 2 days of what went down at the Commission. There has, of course, been quite a lot of talk, especially after day one. Some of the commentary was that the President was treated with kid gloves as compared to some other witnesses who appeared before the Commission. What was your take on the overall outcome?
That overall comment that you've just summarized, I think, is fair, and I join it. The President was not on trial. Everyone who appears before the Commission is a witness. But as a witness, they are meant to illuminate state capture, which is the constitutional purpose of why this Commission is sitting, Sakina. But the President on day one and on day two was in turns vague, and when he was not vague, he was giving shoddy answers, like on the question of, for example, the financing of his campaign to become president of the African National Congress. To the extent that I wish to comment on how Advocate Pretorius conducted affairs and the Deputy Chief Justice, I do think they treated him with kid gloves. Very often he was asked very precise questions. How could you not have known about Bosasa, for example? And the President, who changed the subject and gave forward-looking answers about what he wishes for the ANC and for South Africa going forward, for example, on legislation in relation to party funding. But the Commission is sitting, Sakina, not to hear what the dreams of the President are. They want to know, what have you witnessed? And there was no witnessing that happened over the last 2 days.
So Advocate Pretorius taking a moment out yesterday to say, well, the media, singling out the media for comment, saying that, the media has made certain remarks to the end that we've just spoken, but then, emphasizing that this is an inquisitorial process and therefore it is not a trial. What did you make of that as well, in terms of just how we have been reporting as the media on this State Capture Commission and how it actually turned out when the President took the stand?
Yeah, I listened to that particular defense, and quite frankly, it doesn't wash, Sakina, for one simple reason, that even though this is not a mechanism through which to test whether or not someone is guilty, which is another reason why the former President, President Zuma, should appear, because he's not going to be on trial, and no guilty or innocent verdicts will come out of it. But inquisitorial does not mean that you must be sheepish just because you have an affable president in front of you. Inquisitorial still means to inquire in an evidence-sensitive manner. So if the president, for example, changes the subject when you ask him about the ANC at an organizational level not taking accountability, what is it that you are apologizing for, as the DCJ said? You can't just ask the nation for forgiveness without telling us the specificity and the detail of what it is that went wrong under your watch, taking organizational responsibility for it. So the distinction in law between an adversarial process which is a little bit more rough and ready, like in cross-examination during a criminal law trial, Sakina, and an inquisitorial process. Inquisitorial is not a synonym for let the witness get away with changing the subject, let the witness get away with vague responses. So I'm afraid Advocate Pretorius is unconvincing, and I would put him through an inquisitorial process about the meaning of inquisitorial and expose the fact that the use of that term is a ruse for treating the president with kid gloves.
And then, of course, yesterday, like the day before, President Ramaphosa kept saying that he concedes, and he's not at the commission to make excuses, but he concedes that Parliament dropped the ball. Did you get a sense that he was earnestly assisting the commission to get to the root of what had happened and why exactly the ANC didn't do what they were supposed to in terms of oversight in Parliament?
No, he didn't. And I want to get into the nitty-gritty here with a couple of examples. Firstly, the president used the word anomaly, which is just fancy English for it is very unusual. Once in a blue moon, a Bosasa type of event happened where, oh my God, with hindsight, we really should have known where party funding in part came from. So, number one, there's no recognition of a organizational cultural problem that the ANC was in effect sponsoring state capture and benefiting from it. And what the president tried to do, unconvincingly, is to drive a wedge between a couple of rotten apples and the amazing, otherwise virtuous ANC. At that level, he was dishonest. At that level, there was no accountability. And at that level, there was no, to answer you directly, assisting the commission with understanding how it is that organizations can themselves have agency that they do not use or which they use in a nefarious manner. And we've seen this time and time again. Companies do it very often. Like when McKinsey would say, we had one bad director, but we promise you the company is really, really amazing. And what I wanted from the president is analysis and facts that help the commission to understand how organizations can also aid this kind of thing. And, you know, when it comes to the mechanisms and how Parliament works and the relationship between party and state, the president was also very unhelpful in helping to illuminate how it is that the networks of patronage work. And he made it seem as if, again, there was these honorable set of principles that work 99% of the time. But if we say we drop the ball, then we don't have to give you detail. And it's weird to me that Advocate Pretorius can think that those kinds of answers were precise and detailed and of some assistance to the commission, because they weren't. All it was an election speech. It sounded to me more like we were closer to the local government elections, where you have these vague allusions to recognizing that you owe the country an apology, but you hope that if you say things like one ought to have, with hindsight, that you don't have to be precise. And quite frankly, I think you or me or one of our fellow journalists would have done a better job than the commission to extract the truth and also particularity from the president.
What about Advocate Alec Freund, though? Because I thought he stitched together quite a good, story there, and making sure that when the president did try to make some of those excuses as to why the ANC didn't do as they were supposed to in terms of being that oversight body in Parliament, and because they lead through their members in Parliament, the portfolio committees, and we've heard testimony from some of the former portfolio committee chairpersons at the commission talking about how sometimes they didn't know, but it is clear, if you look at the entire picture, that there was a closing of ranks, if you will, in terms of the resistance to actually look into some of the allegations that had already come up way before 2018.
Yeah, you're spot on. And in a sense, if I can marginally qualify my criticism of how the commission conducted itself over the last 2 days, we've got a problem that is a non-legal problem that is beyond the scope of the commission. It's a squarely political problem with real material consequences for you and I as citizens and as voters. And it is the problem of the political system. We've got a party political system, and Advocate Pretorius himself also correctly pointed out the enormous power that ANC branches have in terms of deciding eventually who is seconded into the state, impacting the lives of millions of people who are not members of an ANC branch. And in that sense, Sakina, we need to re-examine the system that we opted into in 1994. It served us well initially in a transition away from the apartheid-era anti-democratic system that we had. But there are deep design flaws which, with the benefit of hindsight after almost 30 years, we now recognize have simply allowed for a lack of direct and maximum accountability to Sakina and to Eusebius and everyone else in the country. And I think to that extent, there are conversations about oversight in Parliament, other institutions of the state, and the general political system, including the electoral system. There are questions which we as a country ought to have confronted more squarely publicly a long time ago, and we need to do so with haste. And I think some of those questions, to be fair on the lawyers, including the DCJ, are questions that are beyond the scope of this commission, but they are urgent questions that go to the heart of the democratic deficit that you are so correctly pointing out.
And talk about ethical leadership. So you have Bosasa, quite central to some of these discussions around allegations of state capture. And then it's Bosasa as a company, Parliament failing in its oversight role, but also Bosasa coming up again in the CR17 campaign context, where the president said that he didn't know whether the money from Bosasa came from Gavin Watson personally or from the Bosasa account. But then he also said that he was kept away from the campaign funds by the campaign managers. But then he knew it was not R1 billion that was raised. It was, in fact, 300 million, as he put it to the commission yesterday. But there were so many questions here for me, Eusebius. For example, if we go back, if we're being fair and if we're being consistent, when the Gupta leaks happened, for example, we were all over that like a rash, like all of these revelations have come to light. Similarly, there are leaks that have happened in terms of the CR17 campaign funds, where the president in these leaks purportedly had knowledge of what was going on. So let's talk about that, what the president said, and whether there's a possibility that the president could have perjured himself, whether it was here at the commission or elsewhere in Parliament perhaps. Let's talk about all of those nuances around the CR17 campaign fund.
You're absolutely spot on, and that is such a critical part of the last 2 days to slice off for very precise focus. So let's go there. Firstly, on your point about ethical leadership, I love it because ethical leadership is more important, in my opinion, than even complying with the law, because ethics are more fundamental to good leadership than being legally compliant. Obviously, you don't want a leader that is criminal and that does not respect the rule of law. But the rule of law is just baseline requirement for good leadership. What you need, in addition to someone not falling foul of the law, is that they think ethically. The president falls foul of the second criterion when it comes to his campaign to become president of the ANC. Let's give him his due for argument's sake and say he was kept away from the money. I mean, Sakina, there are millions of people that are watching this program. Let's keep it real and not even try and be abstract and intellectual about it. Who the hell tries to become ANC president without caring to know where the money comes from for the campaigning? I mean, if you and I were trying to become, I don't know, the head prefect or the head girl of a school, you would want to know where the money comes from so that the person you run against doesn't embarrass you in week 2 by proving that the money that you got is in fact money that, for example, was unethically sourced by the folks around you who desperately wanted you to become president. So even on the president's own version, he falls short of the ethical leadership requirement to take an active interest in where the money comes from. So there's no plausible deniability because you only have 2 possibilities. Either he's lying and perjuring himself because he must have known, which is a bad scenario in which he comes out unethical, or alternatively, he genuinely didn't know, but he should have known, and he comes out bad in that scenario because it's really poor leadership to take that kind of disinterest in the details of the funding for your campaign to become president of the ANC and ultimately of the country. And
at this point, we have to shine that light back on ourselves as the media as well, because we have to be critical of our role in all of this, because not forgetting, in the end, it's all about a battle for mind share, and the media is part of that particular scenario. So let's look at ourselves and how we have approached this particular commission and the various witnesses that have appeared before the commission. How would you say we fared?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think we rightly sometimes are self-deprecating, and that's important because the media has got enormous power in terms of how it impacts society. And I would never want the viewers of this program, those who consume other parts of our media products, to be anything less than very tough on us when we get it wrong. But I would say, Sakina, that sometimes we're also very self-deprecating. We've got an excellent set of investigative journalists who have been responsible for making sure that, for example, the Gupta leaks that you were referring to are understood by the public, that that information is crunched in detail. We've had some stunning reporting from all of the major media houses on this particular score. And I think that's something worth celebrating and acknowledging as an example of the independence and robustness of the media, even in the face of malfeasance within the state and within the private sector. So we should give many of our colleagues their due, especially the reporters. But what I would say specifically about the president, to come back to him, and I don't want to single him out because I think the ANC has a systemic problem, a cultural problem now, and the state has got a problem as well in terms of a history that predates him returning to politics. But what I would say is that occasionally where we do go awry as a media is that we fall for personalities. We have this idea of trying to make things simple and in the process not paying attention to complexity. We divide the ANC into the good guys and the bad guys. Good guys and bad guys. The bad guys include people like Jay-Z, it will be Didi, it's going to be Aish, Mahashule, and we will write bad critical copy about them and searing editorials about, oh my God, imagine if they were to become president. And then we see the president, by contrast, Ramaphosa appearing, Sakina, and we fall over him, we fawn over him, because he speaks in dulcet tones, he never loses his calm. And I've seen many people on social media saying, bravo to the president, he was so calm, even when he got really amazing questions. But as my dad said to me in a voice note, this man is playing us. He is basically behaving like an actor, quite literally, because his charm and his calm is something that can induce in you a coma after which the ANC will still be institutionally corrupt. So I think to that extent, we need to self-examine the way we report on the presidency. Very often, because Jacob Zuma is our baseline for bad leadership, we are uncritical about President Cyril Ramaphosa because we fall for his affable manner and the fact that he is not Jacob Zuma.
And I think that's an important point to make. But just, looking at the whole question about funding for the African National Congress, because not forgetting this is why he appeared before the commission these 2 days. When asked about the SSA, for example, and whether state monies were used for ANC purposes, the president simply said he's not aware. Shouldn't he be aware as a person who, if for no other reason, as the person who commissioned a report in 2018, which was submitted to him in 2019 by Sydney Mufamadi?
Sakina, you open a can of worms that will require you to invite me back because it requires 20 minutes on its own. And I tell you why. The president is partly right on this one, but that's because we've got a legal problem when it comes to security in the country. We recognize that the spooks in part have to do their work without getting excessive amount of oversight from political principals so that they can collect secrets and hopefully keep us all safe. And there's this weird trade-off at the level of principle between a certain degree of opacity or lack of transparency, to put it more simply, and national security. So to some extent, there are realities about state security agency activities over the last while where many of the political principals do not quite know the details of what's going on. But of course, the report that you're alluding to have criticized just how much that has led to abuse and to the capture of our intelligence structures. There's a whole parallel set of processes outside of the state happening, budgets that are slush funds that have been abused, an act of corruption. And in many ways, this has led to what we have termed the securitization of our politics. And that's a bad thing. Of course, the president should be aware, but the balance that we haven't yet got right, and to that extent, It's a problem that is bigger than him. It has been coming for a long time, is how to make sure that the politicians do not necessarily have the capacity to abuse the intelligence structures and networks. So you do want some distance between them. But of course, the consequence of creating Chinese walls have been that, unfortunately, intelligence itself has also been a site of capture.
So just as to wrap it up, Eusebius, so there was a delayed reaction to state capture from the ANC. Didn't quite know, the party doesn't seem to know where the funding comes from, even though there's been clear evidence led. And some of these things that have been, outlined at the commission are things that we know anyway. You take the Edwin Sodi example, the president himself talking about how members of the party, when deployed, have to pay a certain percentage of their income, a tithe almost, if you will, back to the party. So where to from here for the ANC? Because there was a lot of, we didn't know, we reacted late. Is that good enough?
It's not good enough. And my summary thoughts would be to distill this wonderful conversation we've had into a couple of bold, simple statements. Corruption is rife in South Africa, in the state and in the private sector. The ANC has sponsored corruption. The ANC has also benefited from that corruption in the way that you've just outlined, by asking for a cut of the corruption from the people that it has enabled to be corrupt and to steal from you and I. The ANC cannot claim not to have known organizationally. Where to from here? We need maximum political accountability. And the answer to that question lies in the hands of voters. We've got an election this year. Soon after that, before you have managed to even recover analyses of the local elections, we'll have another opportunity to vote in a new national government. And the ANC in turn, and I will leave this perhaps for the viewers to ponder on, because this requires us to self-examine as voters, the ANC in turn serves at the behest of South Africans that allow it to come up with this kind of fuzzy logic and lack of convincing explanation. So the ANC is not there as a result of dictatorial processes, but as a result of the democratic process itself. So we sponsor the ANC as voters in order to sponsor corruption in turn. And the only way the ANC will change its behavior is if we, civil society at large, take control over what's going on in South Africa and hold the ANC maximally accountable.
Eusebius, thanks so much for your time. And that was journalist and political commentator Eusebius McKaiser reflecting on President Cyril Ramaphosa's 2 days at the Zonda Commission as president of the ANC. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side of that, we'll have your latest news.